So, embedding quotes into any English essay, there are levels to it. There's levels to how cohesively you can embed something into your piece of writing, right? So I might even split it out. Straight away, the absolute worst type of quote, right, is what we call the drop-in quote, right? Something you just chuck in there with barely any connection, or relevance, right? Or even if it is relevant, you kind of shunt it into the writing alongside the rest of the content. Does that make sense? So you kind of just shunt it in. And what does that actually look like, right? The author states, this is the power, right? Hypothetically, right? Um, and so, I mean, that doesn't mean anything to me. That's a horrendous way to embed a quote, right? Largely speaking, you kind of have three ways, right? And I'll actually separate this out, right? Right. So this is terrible. You never want to do this, right? Now, you can either do a short phrase within a sentence. You can do something called a reporting clause and a quote, or you can actually do a mix of your words and the quote. And my favorite is C. My favorite is C. Um, So the way that C works is, for example, you'd say the article claims that women are too emotional for leadership roles, right? Or as an alternative, you might say the speaker warns that quote unquote dehumanizing labels, for example, eventually normalize violence. Okay? Or you can do something like you might even say, the politician constructs refugees as a or as the problem, which in addition you might say that must be managed, right? Rather than people who need protection. So this is very like short, sharp, and point blank, and I don't quite like it because it's not all encompassing. If I'm going to quote something, I want it to be this type because I'm surrounding it with my own words, and a quote needs to be your words, quote your words, right? So you need to imagine it's almost being sandwiched in there, right? Does that make sense? Angie, does that help? Have you guys thought about it in three different types, three different steps? Is that kind of right? And also just to reiterate and kind of add on to that, right? Commas, okay, and full stops largely go inside the quotation mark in most essays. Okay, just generally speaking. So if the quote ends your whole sentence, then the full stop goes outside of the quotation marks, like here, like so. You see that? Like so. Now, if you want, this is really powerful, but you have to be careful, right? Because it's an option. You can take this approach, but technically, if you want, you can edit the contents of a quote briefly or minimally using a square bracket, right? And what does that actually look like? Here I might say, the article claims that women are, oh, mhm, I'll say it like this. I might say, the author claims that these people do not belong here, right? Um, but but the initial quote might have been something like, Persian people, Persian people do not belong here. But you make it these. Um, you might even sometimes You might even sometimes, hold on, right? You might even sometimes see, for example, this or this for gender neutral adjustments to quotes, right? And that's also perfectly okay, right? Um, Largely speaking. So some templates, this will help. Some templates. So you might say, the writer constructs, the writer constructs X as so on, suggesting that dot dot dot. You might say, by describing Y as, insert dot dot dot, the text positions the audience to dot dot dot. You might say the phrase, and then you insert implies that dot dot dot. You might say the repeated use of that dot dot dot, for example, normalizes or legitimizes or mocks or whatever it might be. Or you could even say the speaker relies on, the speaker or author relies on the loaded term dot dot dot, right? To portray dot dot dot. Does that make sense? Beautiful.